Epstein's accountant has sort of become someone who's in the news out of nowhere. However, what I want to say is that he is being called the Forrest Gump of the accounting industry. What I want to say is that this would be part two of the podcast I did a couple of days ago, where I showed how the people connected to my abuser and my abuser's family are, in fact, part of the same world that JE inhabits. Among them would be this mysterious accountant named Harry Beller. Now, my name is Kirby Sommers. Today is November 26, 2025. And the newest thing is that Business Insider wrote a very long article on Epstein's long term attorney, a man they know very little about, but I can tell you that I know a little bit more because Harry Beller was also the the CPA for my abuser's father and very likely my abuser. So Harry Beller is an older man. He had a very small, nondescript office in New Jersey. It was really a one-person office. And if you have been following my work and you know who I am, then you know that I have also made the statement that my abuser and his family were involved in the espionage business. So therefore, it is not surprising to me, at least, that Harry Beller worked for, according to Business Insider, for JE, and I have to use his initials because on this platform, sometimes I can get away with saying his name and sometimes I can't. But he worked for 22 years as his personal accountant. So I've known this for a very long time. And let me just put up a photo here. I've known this for a very long time because clearly, when I became involved in the JE story in July of 2019, it was because I had some pieces of the puzzle. Uh, but hey, mainstream has never decided to interview me, and we're really talking about espionage here. And what I remembered and what became sort of something that bounced back to Leslie Wexner is a couple of things. First is the unaliving of Arthur Shapiro, who was Wexner's CPA. And although articles written about Arthur Shapiro, who met his end um, in Columbus, Ohio, he met a guy. They had a conversation. This man ended up running after him and basically, mob style, and left him unalived the day before he was supposed to appear before a court to give his testimony on what sounds, according to the articles that everybody has written about Arthur Shapiro, which are basically based on Bob Fitrakis's amazing work. But there's an additional bit of information that most people don't know that, in fact, I'm including in my 2-volume Merchant of Death, Leslie Wexner book. And that is that when I was doing research years ago, I found many cutouts that Arthur Shapiro, they're no longer available, they've been scrubbed. Companies that he created in Florida uh, that didn't have anything to do with what he was doing for Wexner, or did they, right? So that I explain in Merchant of Death what I think these companies were used for. And apparently, according to Business Insider, and we'll be getting into this, they talk about how Beller is suddenly they want to call him in for questioning. Well, good luck to you, because anyone who works for the Central Intelligence Agency and for the other one in the country that begins with the letter I, they're not going to really answer your questions, and they have a certain amount of immunity since, this is something that I'm aware of from my experience with my abuser and his family. So on the screen is one of the two attorneys for Jeffrey Epstein. And that would be, let me just get his name here. That would be Richard Kahn. Richard Kahn is carrying some items out of J.E.'s Manhattan townhouse. He was photographed like that. He is the co-executor of J.E.'s estate, along with Darren Indyke. Now, Darren Indyke, I will loop back to him as it pertains to my abuser's family as well. Because, well, this is Darren Indyke right here. So all of these people, again, are connected to my abuser's family. But so I'm going to just sort of put up random information from the article so that you can sort of read it on your own. But I'm going to go over what Business Insider wrote on November 20th, 2025. And it reads, Harry Beller isn't one of the bold-faced names who can be found all over J.E.'s social calendar and emails like former Barclays CEO Jess Staley, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, or Prince Andrew. But for years, Beller was entrusted with managing some of the most delicate parts of Epstein's financial life. Beller was part of a tight-knit team working for J.E., who they say unalived himself in 2019 while awaiting trial on S transportation charges. He worked under the direction of Richard Kahn, Epstein's top in-house accountant. So what I want to say to that is I think they got it wrong. I think Richard Kahn worked under the direction of Harry Beller, who's had a long reign with working alongside people in the espionage industry when he was working with my abuser and my abuser's family. So now it continues. Congressional investigators interested in how J.E. made and spent his money and whether banks ignored red flags that should have alerted them to S transportation now have Beller in their crosshairs. Well, good luck to them because, again, he has been well protected, well hidden. Nothing is going to happen to Beller. I think Beller at this point is probably 80-ish. In any event, I'm going to continue reading. In lawsuits involving Epstein, Beller comes across as something of a financial Forrest Gump, turning up repeatedly in the paper trail. He hasn't been named as a defendant in any of the lawsuits, but his name crops up on incorporation papers for Epstein's web of companies, on Ghislaine Maxwell's tax forms, on checks, and on cash withdrawal records for Epstein's bank accounts, which for years were held by J.P. Morgan Chase. So I'm just going to, I just, I got a whole bunch of this stuff from the article, and I'm just putting up a couple of things up here for you. All right, so he also did, apparently, he did Ghislaine's tax returns and all of that. Clearly, because Ghislaine is another person who is part of the intelligence community. Okay, so civil lawsuits say that HBRK, and those are the initials for a company owned by JE and managed by Beller and Kahn, facilitated, and you see how the initials HB, which stand for Harry Beller, and Richard Kahn, those initials are before Kahn's initials. So it underscores what I just said to you, that Khan was really working under the supervision of Beller and not the other way around, which is how Business Insider has it. That this company, I'm going to call it a cutout, facilitated JE's transportation operation, although they do not name him or the company as defendants. Beller's name is on corporate records and tax documents entered into evidence at Maxwell's criminal trial, at which he was convicted of transporting girls to JE4S and later sentenced to 20 years in prison. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee want to subpoena banks for their financial records about Beller and other people who did business with JE. Senator Ron Wyden asked both the Treasury Department and JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon to produce records from Epstein-related accounts, including those opened by Beller. What I want to say here, I'm going to pause for a minute because I explain the JP Morgan connection to Wexner. Nobody has looked into this, but I explained it in my book, which until this Friday, it's on sale for 30% off. So, Merchant of Death, Volume 1, Merchant of Death, Volume 2. In Volume 2, I go into the long history that connects to Wexner and clearly then later connects to JE. But no one else, and I've looked to see if anybody had connected Wexner to JP Morgan Chase, and historically, I'm talking about even before JE became part of his life, but they had not. And I did so in volume 2, which, by the way, should be shipped out possibly tomorrow or the day after for those of you who have ordered it. And thank you, by the way, for ordering it. I'll leave a link below if you guys are interested in ordering it now that it's at 30% off. So I'm going to continue. Beller hasn't been accused of any crimes, and there is no record of a federal agency pursuing an enforcement action against him. Through his attorney, Jonathan Sack, Beller declined to comment for this story. What I want to say about his attorney, Jonathan Sack, is that he has an office right around the corner from Donald Trump's building. And that's an interesting area between 57th and 55th, 54th Street, between Fifth Avenue and a little bit, Madison and Lex. I've always called it, and I've lived in Manhattan for all of my life, with the exception of times that I've gone and lived elsewhere. However, I've always called it the area where the spooks live. So even on 57th Street, we have where Mossad placed Abigail Koppel's father, Yehuda Koppel, when he was running El for Israel, and they placed him on 57th Street, again, a place just filled with spooks, at the Fisk building on 57th Street. And this would have been on the west side. So the fact that Jonathan Sack has an office around the corner from Donald Trump's building, and really where my abuser is and everything, this area, it's a small area where there's a lot of people with, let's say, interesting backgrounds. I'm going to continue with now they say that the accountant is 69 years old. I would beg to differ, because based on my recollection, I would think that he's a little older than that. But they basically say that this 69-year-old accountant personally handled some of the cash withdrawals from JE's account, which became a catalyst for JE's messy breakup with JP Morgan years after the financier, they're still calling him the financier, pleaded guilty to S crimes in 2008. See, here's so Business Insider is supposed to be a business magazine. And as a business magazine, one would think that they would understand the history of JP Morgan Chase, and meaning their entire history, not the history they present to you, the public, but the seedier side of JP Morgan Chase. which I will do another podcast about at another time, because today we're going to focus on these connections and why nobody really has heard about Harry Beller until suddenly now. But clearly, I'm letting you know that nothing is going to come of it. So it goes on to say that Beller was often the person who physically withdrew the cash from J.E.'s account, recently unsealed court records show. So he worked for J.E. between 1992 and 2014, and his withdrawals of large amounts of cash from J.E.'s accounts with the bank were subject of at least 4 federally mandated suspicious activity reports, and these are called SARS, by the way. And a suspicious activity report, for those of you who may not know, it's whenever somebody withdraws either more than $10,000, that immediately raises a red flag in a bank. Ira taught me this many, many years ago. He used to say that whenever he went to a bank, he never took out more than $10,000 because he didn't want it to set off a SAR. And Harry Beller, I'm sure, taught him this, because that's exactly what Harry Beller did with J.E.'s accounts. So I'm going to continue reading this. So the earliest SAR was filed in 2002, long before Florida police began investigating J.E.'s abuse of girls. Banks are typically, they're concerned about large cash transactions since they can exchange hands without clear oversight. Know your customer rules require financial institutions to monitor where clients' money is going to ensure it's not tried to fraud, money laundering, or human trafficking. Well, ding, ding, ding. That's usually what's happening in all of these banks. And for people to claim, even Business Insider, to write an article like this without then kind of giving you, or the reader, because me, I know what banks are about. Thanks to all, those horrific years I spent as somebody's slave. Um, well, not just somebody, right? Somebody who was above JE in this pyramid of the elite structure. And by the way, I say elite because that's what they're referred to. They're the wealthiest people on the planet, and they're referred to as elite. Now, I've seen some of the commentary when I use the word elite, and what I want to say in the commentary is, oh, they're the worst people of the world. Well, yes, I agree with you. It seems that us commoners, the 99%, we're like, we have heart, we have a moral fiber, we have a moral center. They don't have it, but that is why they become uh, so wealthy, and they become masters of the universe, so that they sit in these very lucrative high positions of power, like Leslie Wexner, like J.E., like many other people. So, and I'm going to continue now with the article. Since J.P. Morgan believed J.E. was a financial advisor for billionaires, those cash withdrawals should have raised more severe alarms, according to Shield, the former IRS criminal investigator. His business is to provide tax or investment advice to the rich. Um, Shield told Business Insider, and to have this account come in to make these large cash withdrawals, well, what's the basis for that? That's not normal business for an investment advisor. So they go on to explain that Beller always went to the same JP Morgan location, which is at 270 Park Avenue, the headquarters. That's where the JP Morgan Chase has its headquarters. Now, the bank knew him very well. In fact, Jamie Dimon knew him very well. And Jamie Dimon is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Um, so recently, that building, 270 Park Avenue, has been removed completely. They just tore it down, and they put up a new office tower to be used by employees. So the repeated visits to the same JP Morgan location should have also raised questions within the bank, said Sarah Krishoff, a former Manhattan federal prosecutor. So, it goes on to say all of this stuff. that in 2002, Beller made 16 different cash withdrawals of about 9,800 each. So remember what I said, trying to keep the amount under $10,000, because, and they go on to explain it here, because the maximum allowed is 10,000. And then what he did was he cashed one check in the amount of $40,000 from one of JE's accounts. So Beller, not Epstein, was the subject of a 2002 SAR inquiry, which a former FBI agent hired by the U.S. Virgin Islands uh, flagged as unusual. But even though the FBI was called in by the bank to investigate Beller under SAR, nothing happened. Okay, so that I mean, like literally nothing happened, nothing happened, nothing happened, nothing happened. So let's see if there's anything here. Um, I mean, there is something that's of interest. I'll share it with you. I'm going to read you this one paragraph, and then I'm going to try to just summarize this for you a little bit more. So, court records show J.P. Morgan taking issue with Beller's cash withdrawals a decade later. They waited a whole decade to be concerned about Beller's withdrawals. They waited a whole decade. So, in an email exchange between bank employees in 2012, that's 10 years after the fact, which were obtained in a lawsuit, it shows them expressing concern over $100,000 in cash withdrawn from Hyperion Air, a corporate entity that is held by Epstein. So, Epstein has this corporate entity. Here's the catch on this. Hyperion Air came into existence before Epstein owned any of the planes. Hyperion Air is where the 727 is kept, so on and so forth. However, Hyperion Air was formed in 1991. Who formed it? Leslie Wexner. Will you find this in records? No, because all the records have been changed. Because if you read again Merchant of Death, volumes 1 and volume 2, you will see that Wexner was handpicked to be part of this world long before JE was part of it. So, what I want to say here is that not only is Harry Beller someone who is connected to my abuser's family and who never came under scrutiny because he was working for intelligence people. I'm just going to leave it kind of blank here. But Harry Wachtel, who is an attorney for my abuser's father, commencing from the 1960s, for his many companies, McCrory's, which is basically Woolworth. He bought all the Woolworth stores. Well, he had a company called Golden Wachtel. And well, who worked for Golden Wachtel for my abuser's attorney? None other than Darren Indike. Now, Darren Indike, I think I've told a lot of you more than once, also had an office where? In the very same building that David Boies had an office. And again, these people use locations in clusters so that and it's even in Bradley Edwards' book. And he describes that the first time he went to meet David Boies, he was taken by J. Stanley Pottinger, who we know from previous podcasts and all of that was definitely CIA. That Bradley Edwards became a little concerned when they walked into the lobby of this office building on Lexington Avenue because he's like, oh, wait a minute. Darren Indike, who is JE's attorney, has an office here, and he felt that was a red flag. Well, duh, it should have been, but Bradley Edwards continued to go into the building, meet with David Boies, who, by the way, was one of the people who called JE long before he ever became the attorney for the victims of JE. So we have just this stew, I'm going to call it a stew of people who are interconnected and interrelated. And of course, now they're saying that Harry Beller is the Forrest Gump of JE's life. No, he's been around since 1990. What did I say here? It says in the article, it says, I just want to go back to see how long he's been working for him. From 1992 to 2014. That's when he worked for Epstein directly. However, it appears to me that he continued to work with Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, um, who, as I said, were the co-executors of JE's estate. Now, Business Insider is saying, well, he should testify because we can get some answers from him. And, I looked around and people are like, oh, yeah, we can get some answers. And even Sigrid McCauley, who is the attorney at Boyce Schiller Flexner, who works with David Boies and who brought the lawsuits against the banks on behalf of Epstein victims, said Beller is someone who knows the inner workings of how Epstein used the financial system. What I want to say is that Sigrid McCauley should know even more than this. However, of course, what is said to the public, to us peons, is very different from what is said internally, because these people, if Sigrid McCauley is as close to David Boies as she appears to be, they would know that this is an intelligence operation, and that Harry Beller has been a very big part of an ongoing multi-generational operation, which I'm going to loop back and say, which is what caused the unaliving of Arthur Shapiro in 1985, who was in the same position as Harry Beller. Harry Beller, what Harry Beller did for the Rickless family and what Harry Beller did for JE is the same thing that Arthur Shapiro did for Leslie Wexner. I am really looking forward to your commentary on the information I shared here. And again, I'll leave the links to Merchant of Death, Leslie Wexner, Volume 1 and Volume 2 in the description box below, along with all of my other links. And I hope you guys have a good weekend. The holiday weekend in the United States is coming up tomorrow, is Thanksgiving. And I again, till next time. Okay, guys, bye.